I'm Teresa DeChant Art Consulting, and today is a talk on how to develop a healing art collection and the history of art collecting for hospitals primarily. I have studied interior design at Ohio University. I transitioned into working as a corporate interior designer on a turnkey art program with Granzo and Gus Architects, where my responsibilities were to not only select the art but to make sure it coordinated with furnishings, finishes, plants, and accessories. I always collected many unique pieces from Pace Gallery and many others. I transitioned then into only healthcare planning and corporate art planning. With that in mind, I'd like to introduce one of the very first people I worked in healthcare, Joe Russell, architect for MetroHealth.
Hi. Uh, well, my name's Joe Russell, and I went to Western Reserve University School of Architecture, and my fifth year, I had a lighter schedule, so I was able to take a part-time job working at university hospitals in the maintenance department, making drawings for rehab or small additions, and it introduced me to a field that turned out to be my life's work. I ended up working my entire career as a hospital architect and then sort of moved into in-house architect and then a planner and a consultant for healthcare facilities. And I retired from a full-time job in 1995, and then I spent about 8 years doing some part-time consulting. I've been working as a staff architect. They had a bond issue for some improvements to the infrastructure, boiler plant and so forth, and that's how I started. And then shortly after I was given the job, MetroHealth was merged with Highland View, and suddenly the person that employed me was gone. And so Sam Whitman came and became the the new. They didn't call him president then; they had a different term, like superintendent. And he said, "Who are you? Why are you here?" And I said, "I'm an architect." He said, "There's no architect in the hospital." And he said, "Can you do for me?" And so he asked me to write a job description.
There you go.
So I wrote a job description, and suddenly became the first architect employed by a hospital.
Yeah.
And ultimately, they had Hamilton and Associates, the Board of Trustees had hired them to do studies, because with the merged hospital and other nursing facilities, there was a county nursing home on Clark Avenue, there was Sunny Acres Hospital in Tuberculosis. And they said, we need to have some kind of a plan, a long-range plan. And that initial study resulted in the construction of some of the early buildings, improvements to bond issues was passed to provide some money at Highland View, some money at MetroHealth, but then they realized they had to go further, and they brought in Henry Manning from, he was working from the Health and Hospital Authority in New York City, and he realized the importance of really good long-range planning. I did all the studies in terms of projecting how many beds we needed in pediatrics and tuberculosis, pulmonary care, and so forth. Everything was
When
changing.
you did that planning, did you think about art already in that planning, or not until later? When did it start coming in?
Well, then we began constructing the buildings, and one of the buildings that we were constructing was an outpatient surgery and in a burn unit, and they were talking about art. We had a committee, And the committee was chaired by Mickey McGraw. You may or
I
may
do
not
remember
know.
her, yes.
And she was in a wheelchair. She had suffered from polio, but she was a very good artist, and she brought that whole program to life. Integration is important, and you got to integrate not just programming, construction, but everything, including the art, the landscaping, the wayfinding. It's very complex.
That's how I learned. The architects always taught me that there are many variables that you have to look at, and the art has to be integrated with all of these variables and work to enhance it. And so that's what I always did. There's very few architects in the USA who work with art consultants that already have an architectural background. Luckily, Cesar Pelli does and did, and he's not with us anymore, but his office still does. And I was lucky to work with their people on 3 major projects. People ask me, what's your favorite project at the Cleveland Clinic or MetroHealth or whatever? And I said they're all my favorite. I was lucky enough to work on 2 projects for the VIP floor for the Sheikh of the United Arab Emirates. However, I also, one day was asked to, go pick out posters for the computer area in a very old building. So I went over, accidentally pushed the button wrong, and ended up down on the basement level. When I was on the basement level, decided I'll get out and take a look because it looked kind of scrubby. And there was a sign that said sickle cell anemia. I didn't know what that was, but it was not very good carpet. The wall covering was half off, and I was kind of appalled. So I finished up my meeting upstairs, went over to, at that time, the COO's office, who I knew, and said, "Can you look at this with me?" So at lunchtime, we went over, we replanned the whole thing. Within a week, we had it totally transformed so that whoever came into that space as a patient felt they were at the Cleveland Clinic. And, I'm just as proud as ever on sickle cell anemia as much as anything else I did. And I got to learn what it was. Every project I tried to learn what it was, whether it was, creating the tribute wall for Dr. Fazio's area or Dr. Novik's area. All these projects had such incredible people, and their accomplishments were wonderful to learn about.
The architects wanted to handle everything in terms of interior design. I pushed hard to get in more of an artistic. Artists have a different way of looking at things. They have a remarkable imagination, and I think successful projects that bring in artists help the architect.
I did a lot of commissioning, and I think it was a great symbiosis between architecture, interiors, and art.
That's right. And these projects, they wanted to simply put in art that was compatible with the interior design or the color of the walls. And I said, no, I need more art. Mm-hmm. And then when we helped with this committee, the committee kept growing. At one point,
do you remember about what year?
Yeah, this was about 1970.
Okay.
And the South Building had just been built. Well, Andrea Hahn, interesting you mentioned that one of her pieces ended up in the burn unit, and it was my mistake because she used yellows, oranges, beautiful,
right. But not for burn.
But patients who had suffered through a fire.
Interesting.
So we had to get that.
That's learning art and healthcare the right way. And every time I did a project, and I didn't even think of that. And so, if I did another healthcare project and it was a burn unit, I'd be very careful about yellows and oranges, just because you said
we had to relocate that piece.
I wouldn't doubt it. Now, there was that situation at Cleveland Clinic once when I finished up the Tausig Cancer Center. Everybody loved everything. It was, beautiful, big landscape paintings. one nurse called me and said, "We need to change the artwork in this room." I'm looking at it. It's just impressionistic, like Monet, with a lady reading a book and a rug on the floor, an Oriental rug on the floor. And so I asked her, "What's the problem? I'm happy to change it anyway, but I just want to learn." She said the rug, it was a Suruk rug, reminds the patients of blood, and they're getting blood here, and they don't want to.
Yeah.
It upsets them more. So same type of thing. So these are the type of situations that, along with way back before I even came to Cleveland, I worked at Western Psychiatric, not at Western Psychiatric, but for them through another architect. And that architect at KMSG did a lot of research on evidence. It wasn't called evidence-based research for hospitals, but that's what they were doing. They had done research. What artwork is best for geriatric care, pediatric care, and psychiatric care? And I was reading all that and applying it as I could and would. So some of what I brought to you and Clinton Clinic was that early reading from them, and we were applying it at Western Psych.
That's when I learned that I had to pay really close attention to the artwork, because I also want to include people who were from the community. We would get an artist who would work. I know in the outpatient plaza, we had a Russian seamstresses do this wonderful tapestry.
Oh, did Mickey McGraw help you with that?
Well, she was in the committee.
Mm-hmm.
That I made sure we had a good, strong, solid committee to help judge the artwork and help select consultants. And I know you did the main piece in the center of that building.
But she designed that, and it's semicircular. She designed that whole thing, and then you approved of it with this special glass tile that was so beautiful. It was a little more money, but she had, I believe, Amish possibly installing it. But there was a company who was able to computer generate it onto the tiles. It was the tile company that she hired, Mariana Yurganov. And that was executed, probably one of the first really bigger commissions I worked on for healthcare.
Yeah, we were learning. The other thing that hadn't occurred to me was hospitals tend to name buildings after people who provided money to the buildings.
Sure.
And and so how did that help a patient's family find their way? So I came up with the idea, well, maybe we should have a north building, a south building, and so forth. And we had that. But then I began to realize that once you're inside of a building, you don't, it took me a long time to learn that. You don't know what direction is north, south, east, or west. Mm-hmm. And so wayfinding is also very important for art. And I've been involved in projects where you find art of a religious nature going a path down corridors to get you to the chapel in the hospital. And so it can be very useful for wayfinding and rather than just haphazard color.
I haven't had that blessing. That sounds like a beautiful project. But wayfinding was a big part of several projects, and what we would do is put a major, something someone would really remember, like right off the elevator or wherever you're wanting them to go from one spot to the next. I believe someone even made a map using those at one time to get people to go from one building to the other. Often I did hear patients say, well, we could figure our way because we know where the, such and such, the Joseph Osicki painting, that, we recognized the artist, and so that helped us remember where to go back.
Oh, I know. I've had to, have tests, whether they be stress tests or others, and the hospitals are difficult. Lucy had surgery, heart surgery at the University Hospital, and I always had trouble remembering how
you got from here to there.
From here to there, and the landmarks really was the artwork.
For you and I, it would be for sure. And then people say, "Oh, you did a great job as a art consultant for MetroHealth and Cleveland Clinic." But I always answer what I truly feel is my success was only because of many artists' success. I selected them, and it all went together architecturally very nice. But without each individual person and people like yourself believing in me, they wouldn't be successful. So it was, a career for both of us where we started something we believed in, but it became something much more that others were influenced by.
Yeah, as I mentioned before, art was my first love, but I couldn't afford to go to the art institute. So I took a vocational guidance test, and the person is reading, the various fields, and art was one of them. And he said, "I've never seen this before. Salesman 0, art 100%.
Oh, that's great. I probably have that too.
And I said, "But I can't afford to go to art school." He says, "Well, let's look at your grades." So he looked at my grades, and my highest grade was in mathematics.
Well, that's good.
And there was no art taught in the high school that I attended. I did it all on my own. And he said, he had another chart and had art plus mathematics equals architecture.
Oh.
That's how I ended up as an architect.
Oh, how wonderful. That's a perfect combination.
Yeah.
And visual planning. Though, learning to think visually is very interesting because I never could do it. Early on, I was not good at geometry. So I don't know how I got to be a good visual thinker, but I did as far as art, and I could visualize it in spaces even. Partly because you just had to do it. I mean, I had a flat floor plan, but I had to also think about what is it going to look three-dimensionally, and I would continually work and talk to the architects, this is what I'm thinking, and they would help me, visualize the space with the elevations and other things, and, and comment on, this might be better, a little bigger in scale, and I got used to doing it myself eventually, but visualization is very critical, and not only that, not only the scale, but the colors, not to match. I wasn't one to match anything. Actually, I could tell you a funny story. One time, and you probably know Frank Porter, we had inherited from him at clinic many important paintings that Frank Porter, a developer, gave to the clinic on loan initially. And I remember having one meeting with him. And at that time, there was one painting that was in a corridor area. We wanted to move it, whatever. And we were where we were going to move it was like really, I forget what, it wasn't that I wanted to match the colors, but I didn't want it to be totally off kilter either. And I remember, whatever way I said it, he wasn't happy. And he was like, art speaks for itself. And he's right. And you don't have to make sure everything works with it. And I'm like, oh, no, I never do that. But it was an important point that I think you made too early on.
Right.
That art is something that really, when it's magnificent, it holds its own.
Well, it holds its own, and it'll have a different interpretation by people. They bring their own life history, their own emotions, and really good art will have something for everybody, not just one person.
Yeah, and I remember you asking me to make sure for certain areas, especially or wherever, that we would have something very complex so that people are sitting there a long time. If they want to get up and look at an artwork that's very complex, I mean, maybe it's a very large, could be as simple as a farm scene, but a lot of animals, a lot of things going on in it. So it told a story and it kept them engaged for a period of time.
That's right.
Some areas I did something more peaceful for, it just depends. In pediatric care, I would often put fathers reading to children because I know I just cherish that memory of my father reading to me as a child and encouraging that as well. And even in geriatric care, I'd always put children and mothers and fathers and whatever, and learned early on that it should be bright colors and it should be more very like photographic realism, whether it was a painting or a photograph, because our aging eyes are already getting fuzzy, and you don't want to have an impressionist, a really soft impressionist painting necessarily in those spaces. If you do, it's more for the family. When I did Smith and Schnacke law firm, which became Thompson Hine in Dayton, Ohio, it was really a joy to see how the interior design and the art all came together. And there were times when I was like, not sure. I think when they deliver the furniture and you've been thinking about it and planning it for all this time, and you're finally getting it, you move a few things, you always do. And then once the art comes and you get it all, oh my God, it came together, and you're so grateful that what you planned actually worked and the client's quite happy. So but there's times when you have all the bits and pieces all around you and you're like, did I do this right? Is there any one specific project or artwork that kind of sticks in your mind that we worked on?
Well, yeah, I think the most important piece was the fountain. And certainly spectacular.
Mariana Yurganov, yeah. It's still there. I was so surprised how beautiful it looks, like the day it was built.
Right.
And the Andrea Hahn's still there. And Charlotte Lease, the sculpture that she did with the figures, is there. Beautiful. Yeah, those are all important figures, and important figures in both our careers in a way. Well, I want to thank Joe Russell, especially for all the time he gave us today. Hopefully many people will have an opportunity to learn from our experiences, and certainly I've been honored and enjoyed all of the time we worked together and learned a lot. So thank you.